Why, you little... I got you! Go! Go!
Stop! He's already dead.
Today, the game director Eladrin has streamed live footage of the new 3.6 open beta that we're going to be getting our hands on very, very soon. I've gone through the 2-hour stream, I've cut it all down, and now today I'm going to be presenting a summary to you of all of the new information we have about the proposed combat rework coming in Stellaris.
Now I'm fully expecting one of the content
More
creators
balance,
to
performance
pause
stability, UI.
What? No, I would never. Anyway, this video is going to be something of a long one. We're going to be looking at all of the new ship roles, the new ship class we're getting, the new frigate class, all of the rebalanced weapons, all of the changes coming to the weapons, or at least all of the changes we've seen so far, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I think they could all mean for the future of combat in Stellaris. So make sure you're sitting comfortably and let's dive in. Let's start here with the big ticket item, and that is the new ship class coming to Stellaris. It is the frigate class. In essence, this is basically the old torpedo corvette class, but instead of being part of the corvettes, it now has its own unique place in the game. It comes with its own unique combat computer, the Torpedo Combat Computer, which will increase explosive weapon damage by 15%. It also has the special Torpedo Tactics, which is that the ship will charge straight at the enemies in strafing runs. As we've actually seen, and we will see a little bit later on when we look at some of the ship-to-ship combat, don't worry, the devs do show off a few combats. We get to see some matchups in the stream, and therefore we get to see it here today. But as you'll see later on, we have both a torpedo slot, a G slot. What used to be the missile slot is now a torpedo-only slot, and a small slot. If you remove the small weapon, then you could end up in a position where your ship will be dealing maximum damage to an enemy battleship that actually can't shoot at you and cannot hurt you. But what does that all mean? Well, let's dive into the next part of this, which is the rework that has been done to all of the different weapons. You see, all of the different weapons have now been rebalanced and changed as well to fit with this new scheme. Let's start with the frigate-specific weapon, and that is torpedoes. So now there are two different types of torpedoes. There are the basic torpedoes, as you can see here, and then energy torpedoes. Energy torpedoes are the old neutron launchers. We will get to those a little later, but in essence they function in some similar ways, but are overall polar opposites. So regular torpedoes, as we can see here, space torpedoes, they are unlocked with the torpedo technology, and when you unlock that technology now, you'll also finally gain access to the frigate ship type, which allows you to put torpedoes on a ship. Brilliant. What do they do? Well, they have a very, very short range. As you can see here, the range on these torpedoes is only 30, making it pretty much the shortest ranged weapon in the game. But on the flip side to that, it does massive, massive damage, specifically against larger ships. Why is that? Well, this weapon deals additional multiplicative damage based on 100% of the target's ship size. What does that mean? So, if this weapon fires at a corvette, which is a ship size of 1, it will deal 200% damage in total. If it fires at a ship size of 2, that is a destroyer, it will deal 300% of damage. If it fires at a cruiser, which is ship size 4, it deals 500% damage. And at the biggest ship size, there is a cap to this. It doesn't do more than 8 times. At the biggest ship size, a battleship or above, it will deal 8 times damage, which is 900%. Your basic damage, which is 100%, plus an extra 800% damage, meaning torpedoes are battleship killers. These ships are meant to be sent out to go in and hunt down enemy battleships and smack them straight in the face with torpedoes. And if you get them in close enough, you should be under the minimum range of the enemy battleships. Minimum range is a new feature we will get to soon, don't worry. There's also firing arc here of 25 degrees. Now that is interesting, but I don't actually think it will have much effect given that ships tend to pivot almost instantaneously, so it shouldn't really be that much of a problem. It also has very, very long cooldown like the torpedoes of old. Therefore, the average damage of this isn't that high, but this is an equivalent weapon to an M-slot weapon. Against a corvette, the damage is very low, but against a battleship here, we're looking at 9 times this damage, which is absolutely phenomenal. As a comparison, there's also the neutron launchers. These are the energy torpedoes. Now, these are very, very different. Instead of being close range weapons like the Devastator torpedoes or the regular torpedo line, these weapons are very long range, like the neutron launchers you are used to. They still have a very long cooldown, but their damage has been reduced quite a lot, except this weapon also benefits from the additional multiplicative damage based on the target ship size. So against battleships, it deals 900% damage, and against a regular corvette, it deals 200% damage. That is the range it will sit between. It also now has a minimum range of 45 and a maximum range of 120, so it is no longer the longest range weapon in the game other than an X-slot weapon or a Titan beam. It is now tied in range to a Kinetic Artillery, as we'll see in just a moment. Also, yes, its damage is quite high against battleships, but against smaller ships, it's now not very powerful. So in essence, really, neutron launchers have been slapped in the face with a massive nerf stick against any target which is of a size smaller than a battleship. And just so that we can get a fair and accurate feeling for the firepower of neutron launchers in the late game, let's compare them to the Devastator torpedo weapons. That is the maximum level of torpedoes you can get in the game for non-energy based torpedoes. And interestingly, the average damage for Devastator torpedoes is on average per day 12.65 compared to 3.4 average damage for the neutron launchers. Even when we factor in that additional damage for hull, this clearly shows Devastator torpedoes, the close range torpedoes, will deal much more damage, over double damage at least, compared to neutron launchers. So neutron launchers really are not the top dog anymore, but that is just in the category of torpedo weapons. We've also got changes to lots of the other weapons, so missiles have also been changed as well. And if you're enjoying this video, please aim at the like button and fire at will. Missiles are now small and medium slots. Missiles are long-range weapons now that in essence are going to function a lot like artillery, except you will be able to stop them with picket slot, point defense, anti-missile weaponry. Fighters, on the other hand, strike craft, will no longer ever target missiles, so don't expect your fighters to screen your ships from incoming waves of missiles. This is the nuclear missile, the very first starting weapon in the game. This has a range of 100, all of the other missiles basically have the same range too. As you can see here, the average damage is quite low, but don't forget this is a small slot weapon, which is quite different to the G-slot weapon it used to be, so it's at least less than half the damage it was prior to this. We still get lots of accuracy and tracking and a reasonable cooldown, as well as 100% shield penetration. So in the very early game, as long as you're not coming up against anything with a picket defense, anything that can shoot down your missiles, as far as the devs basically tell the story, this is the most powerful early game weapon. This is the king of the first 10 to 15 years of in-game, the missile. We have been looking at late game weapons. We looked at the neutron launchers and Devastator torpedoes, so let's also look at a late game missile weapon as well. Here is the Marauder Missile. This deals an average damage of 7 and does not benefit from any of that multiplicative damage that the torpedoes have. So this missile is not going to be very good at taking on battleships, that sort of thing. It is only a small slot. You're probably going to be putting missiles in general on small ships like corvettes and destroyers, possibly also on cruisers, but in essence ships with an overabundance of small slots. They of course still suffer from all of the things that missiles have always suffered from, and that is in essence the fact that they are not an instant hit weapon. Unlike kinetic weapons and laser weapons and the old neutron launchers, missiles take time to arrive at their target, and therefore they don't front load the damage, they only deal damage when they actually turn up. Given they have a speed, we can see here their speed is 18, that means they'll take at least 5 or 6 days before they arrive at their target after they've been fired, assuming the target is stationary of course. On the other hand, a kinetic weapon gets to shoot straight away, and as you'll see later, kinetic artillery still has the same range of 120, meaning it will always outrange Marauder missiles and other missile weapons like this. Kinetic weapons have basically stayed the same, at least for the small slots. On the other hand though, when it comes to large slot weapons, in general now, large slot weapons all have a minimum range. That means that if you're under that range, your weapon simply cannot fire. And because they've altered the way that ships move around in the game, so now a ship will always move to the range of its longest range weapon. In this case, if you equipped a large Gauss cannon, you'd move to a range of 100, and then the ship will actually sit there. It will no longer move in as fast as possible. And as we can see from this footage from the stream, engagements are now quite a bit different because of this change. Ships will generally be spread out quite a bit more. Yes, you'll get a bit of a melee in the middle with your shorter range corvettes and your destroyers charging in to fight each other, but your longer range artillery type ships will sit at the back, your carriers will sit even further back, and they will start pummeling the enemy from those kinds of distances, which is both great from a cinematic perspective, but also means we're going to have some interesting interactions with how our weapons actually work now. However, having said that, there is currently a bit of a bug in the open beta, or a bit of an issue, I should say. It's not necessarily a bug, but the problem at the moment is that the ships will not back away if they are inside of their minimum range. Meaning that if two battleship fleets with only large artillery type weapons jump on top of each other in a system, they will sit there forever in combat being unable to kill each other until somebody else turns up, allowing them to either move a bit or has weaponry that can shoot. That is an issue that is going to be addressed very, very imminently by Aladrin, the game director. He is working on a fix for that so that the ships will back off slightly and then get into their minimum range if they're out of range. However, that being said, there's also the important point to note here that if your ships are very small, if you've got corvette ships with very small weapons and they're very fast, you're going to find it quite easy to get inside of the minimum range of an enemy battleship and hopefully stay there in such a way that they actually can't move back fast enough and actually bring their weapons to bear on your smaller ship. Meaning that yes, you may have some nasty times when you try and get into range from this long range artillery, which is still high damage, but once you actually get there, you're going to find it's a much easier time if you can get in close with kind of the brawler type weaponry. What is brawler type weaponry? Well, we'll cover that when we get to the new different ship. We have new roles for the ships. Each different ship class can choose a variety of different roles, and I'll go through each of those in just a moment. But jumping back to these kinetic weapons briefly, I do want to point out something interesting you might have spotted. If we look at the difference between the small and the large weapon, you will notice that now larger weapons have an decreased rate of fire. Yes, the time between shots, the larger your weapon is increased. Meaning, in this case, if you have a large Gauss cannon, it is going to take over 4 days to fire, whereas a small Gauss cannon only takes under 3 days, around 2.9 I think it was. And it is very nice to have a differentiation like this, not just the change in the tracking, because of course large weapons are more difficult, or they find it more difficult to track smaller ships. They have lower tracking, and therefore that reduces the effectiveness of these large weapons against high evasion ships, but also they now have a low rate of fire. And a low rate of fire will come into effect when we start looking at things like the new mechanic, which is Disengage Opportunities. Hovering over the tooltip for the side jump drive, you'll see that this engine component now gives you disengagement opportunities +2. Basic ship components give you just 1, or basic jump drives, or drives I should say. All of the rest of the drives give you +1. Side jump drives here seem to give you +2. Now what is this? In the past, you would get an infinite number of disengage opportunities in as much as every time a shot was fired at your ship and your ship had less than 50% of its hull points remaining, you would roll to see if it would disengage. Now there is only a maximum number of rolls that you can roll with this kind of thing. Why is this important? What does it do? But what do you think about these new changes to combat and this combat rework? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Well, welcome my friends to the newest weapon, the Nanite Autocannon. This is a tier 4 autocannon, one level above the tier 3, and of course it does require some nanites. But This weapon in its small configuration is very powerful, and now autocannons can be small, medium, or large. Yes, we brought back large autocannons. All autocannons have a very low range. I think the large is a range of 40, whereas this small one is only a range of 30. But they still have a very, very low rate of fire. They deal roughly average damage per shot, but they just get so many darn shots. A 20 average damage here as well is phenomenally high for a small weapon. Remember, the missiles and the kinetics we've looked at so far only had an average damage of around 6 to 8 per day. This is 20. So autocannons are massively powerful now. They also, because of the change to disengagement opportunities, got even more powerful. It used to be that autocannons were very bad at actually killing ships because they would do a high rate of fire, low damage output, meaning because of the way statistics basically works, if you got lots and lots of small rolls, small chances to disengage over a long period of time, that would be much better and you would have a much higher chance of running away than if you just had a few shots at a high damage level, even though each high damage shot is a higher chance to disengage than any of the low damage shots. But now, because of the maximum number of disengagement chances or opportunities you have, this means that autocannons, or low damage, high rate of fire weapons, I should say, so anything like an autocannon, is absolutely excellent for actually killing ships, specifically battleships, or in the early game, destroyers and cruisers that are really pesky with their ability to run away from you. Now, basically you can do away with that by firing lots of shots and wasting their opportunities to disengage on low damage shots. Autocannons are one of two weapons that are the brawler weapons that will go on brawler ships, which is part of the new ship rolls thing, but the other is the Disruptors. Disruptors have also had a massive boost with this new rework. They've had their output almost doubled in terms of average damage. I believe that's partly by having a reduced cooldown and partly by also just increasing some of the damage output. They have massively high accuracy and high tracking as well, as befits this kind of weapon. Now, what is really interesting about this is that previously Disruptors have been useless because they're such low damage, even though they have 100% shield and armor penetration. Now though, because they have quite a bit higher damage output and they're also low damage, high frequency shots, these are going to be really good at actually killing ships and preventing them from running away. I cannot wait to get my hands on this weapon and test it out to see if now with the new meta it emerges that Disruptors are actually better than regular weapons if we want to be running these kind of bypass weapons instead. I've gone on and on about the new roles, so what actually are they? Well, let's start with corvettes. A corvette can be one of 4 roles. It can be a screen. This basically means it will have picket slots on it and it will screen the other ships in your navy, the other ships in your fleet for incoming missiles or incoming fighters, that kind of thing, to get rid of them. You can also have gunships. Gunships generally are very good at fighting ships of the same size or slightly smaller, one size smaller. They will generally be armed with medium type weaponry, that sort of thing. And then artillery. Artillery will, if you're a corvette, basically mean you're full of missiles, and later on if you're a battleship, mean you're full of artillery, large type weaponry, and anything in between will probably have a mix of the two. Artillery are meant to sit right at the back, out of the way of the combat, and just unleash volley after volley of shot into the enemy while safe and sound at the back. That is the point of them. And then we get the brawlers. Now, brawlers are meant to fly in close to the combat. They are, in essence, the kind of stab and slash ship type. They're going to be armed with your autocannons. They're also going to be armed with disruptors. Those are the brawler weapons. Their plan, in essence, is to fly in, as I've said, close. They don't quite have torpedoes. They're not a torpedo carrier, but they do operate in a very similar way. That is their style of engagement. They're going to be very good against artillery battleships, that sort of thing. If you're enjoying this video and you'd like to support this channel, you can do so by following the affiliate link down in the description below and purchasing something from the Humble Bundle store. Until the 27th of November, you can get your hands on the RPG Legends Baldur's Gate and Beyond bundle for under €20. And lose yourself in some of the most immersive, beloved, legendary PC role-playing experiences of all time. Now we have the frigate, a very distinct ship to the corvette. Frigates basically operate in two roles. They operate as either the energy torpedo or the regular torpedo role, and the energy torpedo is in essence an artillery type ship, and the regular torpedo role is the brawler type, which will fly in and nuke the living daylights out of anything which is too large. Also notice that these frigates have very low evasion, and that's actually something to see here. Across the board, they've kind of reduced the ways of getting evasion in the game. Now it's very difficult to get evasion outside of being a corvette. The devs have basically said you will not be able to get 90%. It will not be possible. They've changed things like the enigmatic encoder, the decoder, whichever one used to give us evasion. That no longer gives us evasion. I'll look at that one in a moment, but basically, as you can see, this ship has low evasion. It also doesn't have that much in the way of hull points. It has 400, which is double the Corvette's 200, but still 200 less than a destroyer. It also has less evasion than a destroyer, making it very much something of a glass cannon. It is not meant to survive a long time. It's meant to fly in close and deal damage and eliminate a target rather than being massively survivable itself. Destroyers have identical roles to corvettes, except in essence they have, if you make them a screen, many more picket slots, and if you do make them artillery, they will actually get access to things like kinetic artillery. And speak of the devil, here are the new stats for kinetic artillery. So again, minimum range here of 45, maximum range of 120, which is very, very long range now. That's pretty much the longest range outside of X-slot weapons. Well, I say that, we haven't actually seen what X-slot weapons do yet, so I don't know for certain. X-slot weapons might have a minimum range now as well, and they probably have a maximum range of 150 still, but these now represent the longest range non-missile, non-torpedo type weapons in the game, excluding the X-slots. They have phenomenally high damage at an average damage of 40, but actually, this is still 20 damage below an autocannon, a nanite autocannon's average damage. I suspect, though, because of their massive damage, they have a relatively low cooldown, reasonable accuracy, and, as I said, long range. They've basically gotten rid of neutron launcher as the meta, and we could end up seeing kinetic artillery being the new meta weapon. Specifically from a first strike range engagement kind of discussion or thought experiment. We haven't tested any of this yet, so we really don't know, and we will be getting the open beta soon, but these are just my thoughts as they stand at the moment. Cruisers are now going to be, in my humble opinion, the backbone of any fleet in Stellaris. They are half the size of a battleship, meaning they will suffer half of the damage that you're going to be getting from the torpedo type weaponry, which I am very sure is going to nerf the battleship meta right into the Stone Age. And they also have a wide variety of roles. They can be the gunship role, as I've talked about. That'll be good for fighting other cruisers and also other destroyers. They could be the artillery role. That's going to be good for fighting basically anything from battleships all the way down to corvettes. They can also be the torpedo class. The frigates and the cruisers are the only two ship types that can carry torpedoes, meaning you could equip cruisers with lots of shields, lots of armor, lots of regenerative hull stuff, and then send them off into the fray full of torpedoes to go and kill other battleships, and also have a good time killing other cruisers, because don't forget, torpedoes will get 5 times damage versus cruisers and 9 times damage versus battleships. They can of course still be a carrier. The carrier role is much the same as it was previously. You're going to put strike craft on them, they're going to sit very far back out of range of things, and now they will actually sit back there, which is a beautiful new addition. And then there is also the energy torpedo role, which is the artillery version of a torpedo role ship. And that as well is going to have the neutron launchers, but again, neutron launchers really aren't as powerful as they used to be. Yes, they're very powerful against battleships still, because they deal lots and lots of damage, and they've got a nice long range, so they're going to fire quite quickly. And we also don't know, I'm pretty sure though, but we don't know, I'm pretty sure that this now means that the neutron launchers can be taken down by point defense like it used to be back in the day, back when neutron launchers weren't the meta, but now we've returned to those days once again. But anyway, those are the 5 roles you can have as a cruiser. And then we come to the battleship. Now the battleship still has a lot of damage it can output. It still has the X slot weapons, which I believe might be its only saving grace after this combat rework. You can be an artillery class like a destroyer or a corvette or a cruiser. You can be a carrier class like a cruiser, or you can be a gunship class like everything except a frigate. Now, the main issue they're going to have is that torpedo-based weaponry are a hard counter to battleships now in the mid to late game, and that will mean the battleships really struggle. If we look at an engagement between some frigates and some battleships over twice the fleet power of battleships, well, I'll let Alfred take it away from there.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of artillery battleships being attacked by some not corvettes, frigates.
So frigates.
Are dying.
I left the regen on the battleships this time.
Okay.
So the thing about frigates is that torpedoes take a long time to reload.
So how many frigates have lived?
17 of them, so 10 of them have died so far. But the battleships aren't doing so hot.
They've also added a nice little change here. If you take one of the smaller and technically less powerful sterns, that is in this case on a battleship, the broadside stern, it has 2 medium slots rather than 1 large slot, you'll notice you now get an extra utility slot, allowing you to add more defensive modules or more modules onto your ship if it's not quite as offensively powerful, meaning that you can build more tanky ships with lower fire rate output or lower fire output using this kind of effect. And that leads me on nicely to some of the new modules that we're going to be getting in these A auxiliary slots. We're going to be getting shield hardeners. Now, in essence, what this will be doing is it will be adding 25% or 15%, depending on the component's veracity, hardening to our shields. Hardening directly blocks and counters bypass weaponry. So for every point of hardening up to 100%, that reduces the bypass weaponry's effectiveness. If, for example, if you have 75% shield hardening, the bypass weapon will only bypass 25% of your shields, and it will have to do damage with 75% of its damage to your shield, and only 25% will go through to the next level. We also have exactly the same thing, but with armor. We have armor hardening auxiliary modules. And as I mentioned, the enigmatic encoder and decoder have been changed around now. You're no longer going to be getting bonus evasion and that sort of thing. Enigmatic encoder is now giving you disengagement opportunities +1. Alright, this really did end up being quite a long video. There was a lot to cover. We're now over 26 minutes through, so if you've made it this far in, well done. This is the secret call out. Please let me know down in the comments below. Let me know you've made it this far. And while we're on the topic of auxiliary slot modules, the hull tissue, and I assume by extension the regenerative nanite module as well, have received a massive nerf. The hull tissue, as you can see here, now does daily hull regen of +0. In actuality, I assume it's 0.5%, and the daily armor regen is +0.1%. This is going to make it much less powerful, and back to the days of being an, yes, okay, we might want to have it, but it's really not that good. If you are stacking 3 of these on your ships, yes, you're looking at a daily armor regen of +0.3%, but that's still not going to be that good in combat. It's very much an out of combat bonus, outside the realms of juggernauts and Starkiller type weaponry. Here are a couple of the weapons that I haven't quite gone through yet, mainly because they haven't had that much in the way of changes. The plasma cannons here, and also the swarmer missiles. The main change to plasma is that, like most weapons, they now have in the large version a minimum range, I should say, of 45. The swarmer missiles, on the other hand, they are now a medium slot weapon, so regular missiles are small slots, and swarmer missiles are medium slots. Lasers definitely deserve an honorable mention at this point because, you see, lasers now have a unique role in the game as well. They never have a minimum range if you take a large laser. Yes, their range is shorter at 80 than the 100 range you're going to get with a Gauss cannon or 120 with a Kinetic Artillery, but because they never have a minimum range, you'll never not be able to fire this weapon at another ship if they get too close, which is probably not something that can be sniffed at. It's probably something that's actually going to be quite powerful and quite important after this rework. So overall, what does all of this mean for the current meta, and what does this mean for the future of space combat in Stellaris? Well, one thing I think we can be certain of is slightly prettier battles. We're going to get more spread out units, more spread out fleets, more spread out engagements, giving us more to look at, and it should look slightly more tactical. With regards to the current meta, battleships are dead. I suspect, with what I'm seeing here, I can't see how running battleships outside of the X-slot weaponry, and we haven't seen what's happened to that yet, but outside of that, and that may be a Hail Mary coming in, and X-slot weaponry is now going to be amazingly overpowered, but outside of that kind of thing, battleships, they can be killed with a ship you can research very early in the game, the Torpedo class frigate. They can also be killed by cruisers, anything with a torpedo on really easily, and they're going to be finding it hard to kill these other ships in response, making them much less powerful than they used to be. On top of that, the crowning pride and achievement of the battleship meta was, of course, the neutron launchers, which, against other battleships, haven't received much of a nerf. It's a small range reduction, which is a bit of a nerf, and very importantly, makes them worse, or at least equal now to kinetic artillery. But the main thing is that against non-battleship targets, their damage output has been vastly reduced. And on top of that, if they can be shot down, their damage output is 0. A weapon that doesn't hit you doesn't hurt you. We don't know exactly when we're going to be getting our hands on the open beta yet. The phrase is still soon trademarked, basically. So as soon as you know, as soon as I know, well, we'll probably all know. It'll probably be released in a dev diary very soon. TM. But overall, this does look very interesting. I think in a lot of ways the meta has become quite stale. Yes, there is a bit of an inclusion for psionic max evasion destroyers, but generally speaking, you can get away with just running battleships the entire game and take on and defeat any challenge that comes your way. Now, in essence, the devs have been saying that whilst, yes, I'm not running like three of each ship type for each class, they're just running one of each type in each class, they're still now running more mixed fleets. They're having to counter missiles, they're having to counter fighters, they're having to add extra elements to have a more balanced fleet design methodology, and I definitely think that's really good from an immersion and a roleplay perspective rather than just having unihull fleets. When we finally do get our hands on this beta, I do think we will get some metas emerging. There might be some way of keeping unihull fleets in. Maybe we have 2 or 3 roles in a unihull fleet, possibly. But overall, I think the days of just running battleships are going to be at an end. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to hear more about the massive new changes coming with Stellaris 3.6 Orion, you can find out about the reworked ascension paths and the brand new 4th ascension path they've added in by clicking the video on screen now.